Okay,
Got it.
hey, this is Greg and James. We're back with our second episode of a podcast of Mars, basically a brief history of the Sword and Planet genre. Uh, I'm Greg, and this is
Good old James. Hello, hello.
all right. So, I don't know. It was fun. We had a good time talking about like just the overarching qualities of Sword and Planet, and I think that what we're going to start doing now is we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the individual like pillar franchises, of the genre. And we already gave John Carter a lot of time because that's kind of that's like the
The foundation.
yeah, the foundational ancestor of the entire genealogy. So, we already gave him a little bit of time. We're going to move into some other stuff. So, I guess we'll begin talking about Flash Gordon. So this is a podcast of Mars, like,
Flash.
yeah, episode 2,
Ah.
podcast of the universe. Yeah.
Dun, 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 dun.
So, and hey, what a great place to start. I mean, if there were, we already talked in the last podcast about how Flash Gordon was kind of we already talked last time about how Flash Gordon like sort of more successful in a multimedia barrage approach than John
Yeah,
Carter.
I would say he's probably the only household name from the Sword and Planet genre that people, who aren't interested in science fiction or fantasy at all have heard the name Flash Gordon.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of what you got going on with that is the cheesy 80s movie, with the
Right.
hokey special effects or whatever, but it's become a cult classic. And there's a lot of other great stuff going on there. Sam Jones, Brian Blessed, Ornella Muti. But a large part of that success is that just super over the top, ultra enthusiastic Queen soundtrack. And that's just one of those things. I mean, like it even got referenced in what Blades of Glory. That was the music they picked for their final men's duet like figure skating thing was
Yeah, the Tenacious D, Jack Black. They do a
right,
great cover of that song.
exactly. So the song of the hero helps keep the memory of the hero alive. So not terribly different from the days of like oral history and legendary being passed along, I
Yeah, I
guess.
think also just the fact that it was from the 80s, before the modern era where there's just so much science fiction and superhero content. It's like it's coming out of your ears these days. Whereas back then it was like you were scrounging.
Mm-hmm.
If there was something on TV that had science fiction or fantasy elements, you were just like, well, I guess this is what I got. And you're gonna, even if you didn't like love it, it was something that was different from,
There would be like one moment, there would be one scene or one
right.
character or one special effect that like really did it for you and made like
Yeah.
the whole hour of watching it with all of the commercial interruptions like worth it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, this was like an era where people would go to the theater just to see special effects. Now every movie and so many TV shows have phenomenal special effects, but back then, just this movie's got such good special effects. We're just here for the special effects. We would go to martial arts movies just to see the fight scenes,
Right.
and back then, just like those Batman movies in the '90s weren't great, but you would so excited just to see a guy in a Batman suit run around, and I think that was the deal with Flash. He was, it had spaceships. It can't all be Star Wars. There's only so many times you can watch it. It was the best.
Right.
You're a kid. You want, action and adventure. And it's in syndication. You turn on TBS, you turn on the Saturday morning cartoon, and it
Right.
was just constantly on. So I think that a lot of people just kind of grew up watching it that way.
It was definitely an event like at our house. It was just one of those things where you knew it was hokey, you knew it was silly, but you loved it anyway. I mean, like you knew that all the special effects weren't necessarily top notch, but the thing was is it was just so bizarre to look at and to
That's true.
watch. Like it has this weird outsider art appeal. I mean, granted, it was made with like millions of dollars and a studio backing it and everything, but it just has this weird quality of being slightly out of step with everything else that was happening. And
Well, it
if
came
it
out the same year as Empire Strikes Back, right?
right, right. And that's the thing though, is that like no one could have predicted. I mean, well, I get we can't say no one could have predicted it because Star Wars already happened, but things were already proceeding in that direction. And it could have just been another lame Star Wars knockoff like Battle Beyond the
Buck
Stars or
Rogers.
whatever. Right. Yeah. And instead it was just it's very much its whole own thing. It was very true to the original serials, of Flash Gordon. I think that That's one
The
thing that
plot
you
was very faithful to the original comic strip, you know.
absolutely, absolutely, it was.
Was it Dino De Laurentiis who
Yep.
produced that, or was it okay?
Well,
So he produced Conan, right?
yeah, and I think it was really like he was the overarching guy in charge, but I want to say,
I bring up the producers because he grew up a fan of Flash Gordon, and you know, even if you wanted to like do a Star Wars type Flash Gordon, he was probably not really into it. You know, he
yeah,
probably wanted to see, you know, the ray gun Flash Gordon brought to life in the with modern special effects of the time, and so on and so forth. So I don't think with that producer you were getting away from. In a way, it's kind of like the last of those movies. You know, there's kind of like
yeah,
that. Star Wars is the kind of the, what do you call it?
the
Before and
benchmark
after
or
point, right?
yeah,
Because like
yeah,
after Star Wars, it was like movies like Alien, Terminator, like you know, the kind of, you know, for lack of a better term, I guess the Flash Gordon style of science fiction production design was going extinct, and
yeah,
how appropriate that Flash Gordon was the last of those types of movies with those types of rocket ships, those types of ray guns, those types
yeah.
of uh, futuristic cityscapes, and so on.
I love all of it. I can't help it. I mean, I'm not even gonna lie. You know,
I didn't see that movie as a kid because I grew up, as you know, I was in Korea at a military base, so I knew of the Flash Gordon movie, and I had a couple buddies who were into it, and I'd watch it with them. It is entertaining enough, but I wasn't like a super fan of it. But
right?
I am a super fan of the history of comic books, and that's where I come into it from. Like you read every comic book artist of, you know, Jack Kirby. Well, they're all influenced by Alex Raymond.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about that in the previous podcast. Of both of us like to read the foundational material. It's not just enough that you love, you know, Star Wars or whatever, and you know, Lucas was influenced by the Flash Gordon serials. Like you want to watch those old serials and get a sense of the pedigree of the things that are popular now, and that's what's great about it, you know, is that if you can appreciate the material in that sense, it doesn't matter if the special effects are not what everything you want them to be. It doesn't matter if things aren't as slick. It has a certain earnestness that's very appealing, and that's what I like about it more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, for me, you know, I watched it actually not that long ago. I want to say like earlier this year. And the thing that really stood out to me, other than you know, not the dog, but other than Sam Jones, I was really impressed with how well casted and acted it was. I mean, the guy that plays Zarkov is like, he's perfect for the role. The guy that
Yeah.
plays Ming obviously is perfect for the role. And you can just go down the line, Prince Baron. You know, like
Yep.
who could ask for? I mean, you look at the original Alex
Zoltan.
Raymond comics, and you look at what's that guy's name? The James Bond guy, Timothy Dalton.
Timothy Dalton. Yep.
And it's like, man, you know, if they put him in that weird yellow body paint that they had in the original strips,
Ugh, yeah.
he would have looked like he walked off the page.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but and the thing is like that goes back to, you know, how we were talking about previously, like what elements you preserve and what elements you modernize. Eventually, even the strips moved away from that like vibrant, bright yellow skin color. I mean, not to belabor a point, but obviously, Planet Mongo. You know, like
Right,
Ming the
Mongol.
Merciless. I mean, there's very much like a yellow peril, you know, component to
Yeah.
all of that. This evil Asiatic overlord from outer space or whatever. But visually it's really stunning. You know what I mean? It's really
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. I kind of feel like, you know, obviously there was like a little more of a fantasy component in that first year of Flash Gordon. There were like more dragons and animal men. And then as it went on, it seemed like it was more of a Prince Valiant on another planet thing as the strip went along.
Yeah, very much
Um,
so.
Raymond, down to the drawing. Raymond's drawing was like more beautiful and pristine the way that Hal Foster's was, you know. So, um, you know, that energy though. Tom Scioli has talked about how that energy of that first year of Flash Gordon was like, you read that and you see where like guys like Jack Kirby and Jerry Siegel, or you know, like how that inspired them to kind of create all the things they did
Yeah,
in
absolutely. I
comic
mean,
books.
well, you know, even Kirby himself is, you know, and Kirby's the king, you know, but even Kirby himself, I mean, he's like, oh, I'm, you know, I mercilessly swiped from Alex Raymond and Flash Gordon. And
I think everyone, you know, obviously Bob
yeah,
Kane's famous for doing it.
yes,
Uh,
yeah. I mean, that cover
yeah,
image from the first cover shot of Batman, you know,
right.
that,
Frank Frazetta.
mhm.
I mean, just people. Yeah, that's the thing. You know, I don't want to get off on a totally different tangent, but uh, back then artists swiped. You know, the deep the deadlines and the amount of volume that you were producing as an artist back then, it's not no wonder, unless you
Yeah.
were, and the youth too, like a lot of the guys that were really young, those were the only ones willing to accept those kind of sweatshop
Yep.
wages. So they got to do what they got to do.
Well, I mean, going back to youth, I mean, if you just want to get right down to it, that's how I learned how to draw, was swiping stuff.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
you see what you like, and you see what works, and you see what looks good, and you attempt to replicate it yourself. I mean,
And you see what you're capable of.
yeah, yeah. No, nobody's like doing this stuff in a vacuum. It's just
Right.
But as for Flash Gordon himself, obviously, again, not being created in a vacuum. Flash didn't just like spring fully formed, completely, everything that it was and ever would be at one time. You know, Buck Rogers was already in existence. Buck Rogers was already popular. It was kind of a runaway phenomenon. It was a serious contender in that whole, how we look at the big two rivalry of DC and Marvel. You had Buck Rogers, and then Flash Gordon emerged as kind of the upstart and eventually eclipsed Buck Rogers in popularity.
Kind of like how Marvel eclipsed DC.
Absolutely. And, just like we talked about last time, initially they wanted to get the rights to the John Carter strip, but John Carter was a very hot commodity, especially at that time. Edgar Rice Burroughs, super popular, Tarzan, John Carter of Mars. These were like big names, and they couldn't afford it, or King Feature
They didn't want to pay it.
Right.
That's kind of what I was wondering, and this is all just conjecture, but like with Tarzan, they were willing to pay the license because they knew they were going to make a fortune. It was like Tarzan was a lock.
Right.
John Carter, they probably didn't have to pay as much for John Carter, but then would they, receive in kind? Would it be worth it to buy the license?
Right.
There was a John Carter strip produced at some point in the golden age. That Burroughs, there's like that Burroughs site that kind of archives a lot of the.
Right.
I wish I could remember the name. But they have some of the strips online. It's not nearly as beautiful looking as Flash Gordon.
Well,
yeah, I mean,
I don't want to like really gush about it, but Alex Raymond's art, in terms of kind of like the photorealistic adventure art, before that era of more, and Kirby brought that era in, that whole interpretive and much more exaggerated and kind of cartoonish delivery of action. I mean, those. The black and white art on those Burroughs Flash Gordon strips, it's luscious, man. It's just really,
yeah. Actually, Dave Sim from of the Cerebus, he talked about it because if you want to kind of see where Kirby's kind of more impressionist style comes from, you look at guys like Milton Caniff,
yep,
the big bold slashes and stuff, and the original adventure strip artist Roy Crane had a much more cartoony
right,
art style. That's kind of what made Hal Foster's Tarzan so special at the time, because his drawing was a lot more solid and based on like life drawing.
yeah, like principles of legitimate illustration as art. Yeah,
right. So Dave Sim, his contention in his Strange Death of Alex Raymond book was that on one hand you had the two top adventure artists. You had Milton Caniff, very impressionistic, very stylized, and then you had the super realistic Hal Foster.
yeah,
right. Very academic, very gorgeous. I don't mean academic as an insult, by the way. I think he's just one of the top talents of all time. No, right. So, and his contention was that Alex Raymond was a combination of the two. He had solid structural drawing skills like Hal Foster, but he brought more of a flair and pizzazz, I guess, of impressionism to it. So you were kind of the exaggeration helped. It's kind of like when Buscema took on Kirby principles into his own art, and brought in that level of exaggeration and cartooniness, but he still had that foundational realism to his art. I guess that he was saying that Alex Raymond was the first of that style of artist. What do you call it? A hand in both pots.
Well, there's just so much stuff where, like you said, it's based in that foundation of legitimate artistry, anatomically correct drawing principles, etc. But there are a lot of moments where one of the cavemen is like running at somebody, or somebody's like screaming and waving their hands because something's about to blow up, and there's a wonderful exaggeration to a lot of that stuff. And it is that, like you said, that hand in both pots, realism and cartoonishness. And
Well, you
It's
can
just
really
really
see it
great
in the
stuff.
purport. Just if they both drew a guy standing there, like Prince Valiant is proportioned like a real human being is proportioned.
Yeah.
Alex Raymond's Flash Gordon is proportioned like a John Buscema figure, or I guess John
Yes.
Buscema probably bases it more on him. It's like the longer limbs. He's more heads tall. He looks like a Titan. In terms
Yeah.
of proportion. So, yeah. Either way, though, I mean, it's just gorgeous, gorgeous work, and he just got better and better. He was like a meteor. You look at the original strips, which were well drawn, and you look at him like 3 or 4 years later, and it's like the guy never stopped getting better.
Yeah, I don't want to be, I'm not detracting from like what other people enjoy, right? But when you look at the history of that artist, where he and eventually how, because of the circumstances and what the war and going away and then coming back, he was replaced on Flash Gordon, and they gave him the
Right.
option to create like whatever new strip he wanted. And wasn't it like, was it Secret Agent
Rip Kirby.
X9, Rip Kirby or
It was
whatever?
Rip Kirby. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was like I think he was a special agent, but when you look at it, it looked like he was a private eye or
Yeah, it
something
was
like
it
that.
was very it was very much like much more founded in reality, a
Well,
detective
it was
kind of thing.
based in, if I'm remembering and understanding correctly, it was based on fashion illustration of the time.
And
The
that that's
style.
that's all to the good. And the thing is on Rip Kirby, you can see his art just kept getting even better and better, but the subject matter just doesn't appeal to me as much. I wanted
And I'll admit, and I've not done a deep dive into Rip Kirby. Maybe I'm just missing out, but that Flash Gordon work just really exploded off the page.
yeah, it's super powerful. Um and that was the thing. It wasn't just that he got better on the page. The world was being invented as the adventures went on. Each installment of the strip kind of continued to develop and add on to whatever pre-existing lore, from last Sunday's strip. And it's nice to see that, where as the artist is growing, the story is growing. And Flash Gordon did definitely grow beyond what he was created to be, which was one, a rival to Buck Rogers. Also, it was inspired, at least in part, by When Worlds Collide. And, When Worlds Collide had that basic formula of hero, girl, and scientist versus the oncoming planet that threatens all life on Earth.
You'll have to
Um,
explain this one to me because I'm not familiar with When Worlds Collide.
all right. Well, When Worlds Collide it was originally a serial, like most science fiction stuff was back in the day. It was eventually collected into a book, but it was written by Philip Wiley, and Philip
Okay, he
Wiley,
created Gladiator.
exactly, and considered a partial inspiration for Superman. And Philip Wiley had a co-author for When Worlds Collide, which is funny because apparently I didn't know this until recently, and I hate that I can't remember the guy's name, but apparently in the early days, Raymond had a co-author for Flash Gordon because they liked what he was doing. They liked the ideas that he brought forward, but they felt that he just wasn't there quite yet in the storytelling, or at least, the writing portion of it. I
Um,
can't, man. I hate it, and it makes us look less knowledgeable. But we're too armchair experts. We're laymen, so it's not, you know what I mean. I wish that I was a great comic historian, but I can't remember the guy's name in the moment. But
well, I'm looking on my phone as we speak, my
there you
friend,
go.
and
Thank God for modern
it said
technology.
Dawn. It said Dawn, so I guess it must be.
But either way, the point is they both had co-authors, but like just like Philip Wiley is, if you bring up When Worlds Collide, if you bring up Gladiator, he did write by himself, but when you bring up When Worlds Collide and the sequel, I think it's After Worlds Collide, nobody remembers that other guy. They just remember Philip Wiley. And no offense to the guy that helped Alex Raymond out when he was getting his wings under him, but nobody remembers Raymond's co-collaborator. I mean, for all I know, maybe he was like the Bill Finger of Flash
Uh,
Gordon. Raymond kind of just comes to eventually control everything about the strip and the direction, the story, etc. So at some point he got good enough, I guess, to where it wasn't felt necessary to include a co-author. And
well, he wasn't like publicly credited too. I think that's
right,
the other thing. It just said Alex Raymond on there. And let's give this guy his due, because this
yeah,
guy wrote. We don't want to Bill Finger this guy. So I
right.
got the Flash Gordon wiki up. It says Don Moore was the writer of Flash Gordon, took over script writing duties from Raymond in August of 1935. He was a former pulp writer.
Which makes sense because there's a very pulp component to everything that happens in Flash Gordon.
And you got to remember too, he's also Flash Gordon, Secret Agent X9, and Jungle Jim. So
Right.
Raymond had his hands full.
Yeah, absolutely he did. And Flash Gordon follows a lot of the typical Sword and Planet tropes. The difference being that as opposed to guys like John Carter, Dre Prescott from the Kregan slash Antares slash Scorpio novels by Alan Burt Akers, which from what I understand is a pen name of Kenneth Bulmer. That's neither here nor there. But unlike a lot of those guys, he didn't teleport, he didn't astrally project, he didn't fall through some gap in the dimensions, or even really get kidnapped by an alien. You know, he traveled in a ship. It's much more conventional, and it's funny because what Burroughs eventually went that same route with Carson Napier, like Wrong Way Carson Napier from the Venus books, who traveled to Venus by rocket.
What was interesting was that he traveled by ship, but the planet Mongo was traveling through space. Yet it's had a consistent atmosphere. So the planet was hurtling toward Earth, and that's why they were able to,
Right.
fly to it so easily. So we shouldn't forget that insane fact.
Well, it is. Like, I mean, obviously, if you want to, if you want to no prize it or whatever, Ming's devices are such that he can somehow move the planet through the void of space and not destroy all life on the surface of the planet.
Meanwhile, you're still sword fighting guys on the planet.
Absolutely.
Bows and arrows.
Absolutely. But that's what makes it Sword and Planet. We always
That's
come
right.
back to the mixture of the old and the new, the futuristic and the barbaric.
I mean, it's got a sword,
right? It's got a sword.
The planet Mongo,
it's got the planet Mongo, and Flash also has a ray gun. It goes back to that sword and ray gun thing, or just and it's funny. I brought out some of the books just so that I could look at them while we're talking about it. I already had a few things jotted down in my notes, but just some of those early ones are really. It just really, it starts off with like a super important premise, like the planet Earth's about to be destroyed. There's an alien planet rushing at it. And Flash, expert polo player and Yale graduate, he's on a plane with Dale Arden of no discernible talents or skills or profession. And the plane gets hit by a meteor and crashes near Zarkov's lab. So total happenstance. Right. This isn't a plan to send like the best 3 people from Earth to head this off. This is like a total accident. Zarkov, just like the comedic moments in the movie, he accidentally runs off his cowardly assistant who will not help him get on the rocket and defeat Mongo. So he takes Flash and Dale at gunpoint and forces them to get on the rocket ship. So I mean, there's a farcical element that I love, which probably seemed more believable at the time, but it's just so silly. Like, okay, get on this rocket at gunpoint, and this is what, 1937 America. So it's like, rocket, that thing doesn't even look like, it doesn't even have wings. How's it gonna fly?
It's amazing too, the because you think about you're setting up this newspaper strip. I can't remember if it was the first or the second strip, but basically they were on Mongo within like either 9 to 18 panels.
Yeah. It takes no time at all. They're on Mongo. They crash. Some soldiers show up and they kidnap. I see in the movie they take like all of them to Ming directly, which cuts out a lot of unnecessary, build up to the premise. But in the Sunday strips, and it's a new thing, and again, you're building the mythology and the lore of the series. I think somehow he gets separated from Dale and Zarkov, or he goes to look for help and he's like immediately attacked by a dragon or something.
So it was a similar. Yeah, he gets there, the ship crashes, and there's like some sort of a giant lizard. It's actually very faithfully done in the Buster Crab, who I can't believe we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
But in the Buster Crab serials, with some of the most comical special effects you'll ever see, but considering what they had to work with back then, I'm not going to knock them.
It's not bad. It really isn't. And it's
like
very
you got
faithful.
These lizards, and you get, it's pretty amazing stuff. I'll just leave it at that. But there's kind of like, it's kind of like that first thing. It's the Sword and Planets. What's the word? Formula, I guess you could say. I know that doesn't sound very complimentary, but so when you first get to the planet, you have a period of time where the hero has to experience culture shock.
Yes.
Where, the writer is really emphasizing you're not on Earth anymore, and here's how we're going to show you're not Earth. We're going to show you the most exotic creatures and fauna and customs,
right,
and how barbaric the planet is, how savage it is. We're going to create a sense of peril for our heroes. That's kind of like the build up to it. Before you even meet the bad guys. We're going to just say
Yeah.
this whole environment, which is really the start to me. There's kind of a generic quality to all the heroes of, or not all of them, but many of the heroes of Sword and Planet. There are kind of these, Flash Gordon types, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
but John Carter is. And I think that's because the character really isn't the star of the strip. The environment is the star of the strip. It's, what's his name? Orson Scott Card. If you read his book on writing science fiction, he has something called the mice quotient, which is one of these three letters is basically the star of the strip. There's, what is it? C is character, E is environment, I is
Right.
idea, and I'm blanking on M. But it's one of
Motive.
these things is like everything has all those things. There's always an environment, there's always an
Right.
idea, there's always a character. I'll have to look this up, but one of them's the bigger star than the other, right?
Right.
And for Sword and Planet, the environment
Absolutely.
uh, is
Absolutely. It
definitely
is.
the star.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like if they just showed up on another planet full of office buildings and people in business suits, that's like an episode of Star Trek where like they need to save money on the sets.
Oops, I was totally wrong. It's not environment. It's milieu,
Uh,
Milieu. How do you
yeah,
pronounce
one of
it?
them weird French words.
And
I
then
think
E
it.
is event. So
Yeah,
it's
I
one of
think
these
it's
things is the
Milu
star.
is like the setting or the particular time and
Right.
place,
So and that's
whatever.
so it's milieu is what it is for Sword and Planet.
So you've got like you said, they set up the environment almost immediately, and it's great because it gives you an opportunity to have these weird savage creatures. And I guess like at the time, the weird Tin Man suits that Ming's guard are wearing, that probably seems futuristic or robotic enough that they were identifiably not traditional suits of armor like a knight or someone would wear. They were
Right.
meant to be, and they're brought before Ming. The irony of it is that like there's sort of like an unrequited star-crossed lovers thing that happens almost immediately. Princess Aura sees Flash and is like, oh, I gotta have this guy. That very pulp formula of the evil chick falls head over heels for the hero and is like willing to murder people to get him. And
Right.
but Ming
has the exact same thought.
Right, has the exact same thing, not with Flash, although that would be pretty funny.
Well, that's what I meant, actually.
Well, even better, I mean, like, who's writing that one? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
But
Hey, you want to make some money in this business?
right,
That's what you're right.
You got to take chances. But but obviously Ming has a thing for Dale, and that becomes a recurrent theme throughout the series. They escape very quickly. For a guy that rules a whole planet, he's a tyrannical warlord. He's in charge of everything. Flash and the gang get away pretty quick.
Well, let's not overlook one of the foundational tropes of the Sword and Planet genre, which leads to the escape, which is, hey, we're going to make you a gladiator, bud.
Right.
So they get there, they get in front of Ming and, hey, take your mitts off my girl, mister.
Right.
And then says, oh, you're insolent. I'm going to kill you, but I'm not just going to shoot you in the head here. I'm going to make you fight these savage beast men. So, of course, Flash Gordon kicks butt, no problem.
Right, but let's take a moment to mention those creatures. Well, was it the Beastmen? Yeah, because it was Beastmen initially, but at one point, you'll be torn apart by two sacred Drox, and the Drox really look like big bipedal red stegosauruses. But I love that. I love like the weird dinosaur-like creature, and then also they're sacred. So these evil aliens aren't like us, even though they have all this technology. They're primitive. They revere animal worship or whatever. There's again setting up that alienness of the environment.
Those are two things from the Flash, not the Flash, the John Carter series, right?
Right.
The Gladiator,
right,
and the exotic creatures, the Banths and all the other ones.
Yep. And then it goes a step further and it continues in the John Carter tradition, because one of the ways that they escape is they find and somehow very quickly figure out how to take control of one of these false idols, where the idol speaks and the hands move or whatever. I think Zarkov's the one that discovers it, because Flash runs up at one point and it looks like it's that cliffhanger ending where the statue starts talking. And then immediately in the next, strip next Sunday, oh no, it's just me, Flash. I'm messing with you. We got to get out of here,
Right.
And that false idol that the tyranny of the alien planet uses to control the superstitious natives who have all this technology, but are too dumb to figure out that the statue isn't really talking. It's some jabroni working for me.
Yeah, and also there's also a little bit before that, there's the kind of another Burroughs trope of the guy in the wilderness trying to survive and protecting the girl. Because how Flash escapes from the gladiator pit is like a pit opens and
Right.
Ara tries to save him. They both go down the tubes,
Right.
and then now Flash has kind of got this girl in tow as he tries to figure out how do I get back to save Dale.
Yep. Yep. Thus the adventure is born. I mean, and that's the great thing about it, is that it hits the ground running and it just gets better and more complicated and more fun just so quickly. And
There's a freeform quality. One of the things I've really, and we've talked about this a lot in our personal conversations, is that kind of freeform improvisational quality to comic strip writing, because it wasn't like writing a book or even
right.
a comic book issue. It's like, we need to fill up these, 6 to 9 panels for Sunday strips, right? We need to complete this. And,
Yep.
Russ Manning, when he did the Tarzan strip, said, I have a general idea of where I'm going, but moment to moment, I'm just kind of writing them as I do them.
Yep.
And I think that kind of leads to, it definitely creates a lack of structure that I think most modern readers expect from their fantasy writing. But
Yeah.
I think it also kind of creates this sense of, wait, anything can really happen.
And that's really what you want. I mean, yeah, it definitely was not written for the trade. I won't say that
Absolutely.
I won't say it was disposable entertainment, but it was not written with this whole like within living memory concept. It wasn't meant to have like a definable, rising
They weren't,
action, climax, falling action. It was
they
absolutely meant to
brought their
just,
A game. I mean, Alex
yeah.
Raymond, he didn't, like, you look at the level of time they spent in the drawing, but it wasn't like these are going to be collected and put into a library and all of my mistakes will be on display
Right.
for, the world to see forever on end. It was just like, it was kind of just, it was almost like, I guess you could say almost like performative. It was like a performance. The
Yep.
newspaper comes out, people see the show, the newspaper's thrown away, time for the next show.
Right. And yeah, and there is an improvisational quality to it, which, like, it just adds to the flair. It just adds to the flavor. Bingo, bango, bongo. We're back.
All right. So where did we leave off?
Wanted to talk about the original serials with Buster Crabbe.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, he was the Flash Gordon for an entire generation, probably multiple generations of people, because even after those serials were out of rotation in the theater, they stitched them all together and they would play them on like Saturday afternoon TV and stuff, probably
Yeah, they would
throughout.
show them as a TV series, I think,
Right.
as well, during like the 50s when television was first coming around and they didn't have a lot of programming in the can. They were using serials, and then Flash Gordon, of course. Hey, why not?
Yeah, and the funny thing is that Buster Crabbe, I feel like he doesn't do a bad job as Flash Gordon. He's certainly no worse than Sam Jones. Nothing against the guy, but Flash goes back to that thing that we're talking about, where it's very much like a reader insertion sort of thing. He doesn't have to have a whole lot of complexities to his character, the delivery of his lines, like who and what he does. He's just there to be the hero and let you kind of get carried along for
Yeah,
the ride.
I would say there hasn't really been a perfect Flash Gordon. Like when you look at the comic, like how Chris Reeve with Superman. You look at Chris Reeve, you look at Superman. Hey, this guy's a good match.
Yeah,
I would say, I don't know, like a young Paul Newman or something like that might work.
I could see that.
Um,
Yeah, I could see
you,
that.
you need someone that's just got that kind of the thing with Buster Crabbe was he I don't know, he seemed like real what's the word? Like during the fight scenes, he'd almost kind of have like a psycho quality to him. No, no, and he'd like strangle people, and you're
Right.
just kind of like, whoa, this
Well,
is kind of dark, but I'm into it.
maybe the psycho quality is appropriate, because like I look at Buster Crabbe and like the physique is there, right?
All right.
But his face, it's like if you dyed his hair black and put goggles on him, he should play like Plastic Man. Like he's got like this weird elongated chin and
I
this
was
kind of
not. When you said dye the hair black, I was thinking you're going to be like, he looks like he should be a mobster. So I did not expect Plastic Man.
no, like he's got this weird elongated chin and his forehead kind of tilts back, and he has this wavy hair that kind of it's springy, like it pops up off of his head a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just
Well, that was that unusual era where if you were like a star athlete,
yeah.
let's get you in the movies immediately.
Yeah, and things have changed now. I mean, like I can't remember when the cutoff point is or even who said this, but it's like you can't be ugly and be a star in Hollywood anymore. But I mean, think about like Humphrey Bogart and guys like that. These are people that made their, Charles Bronson. These are people that made their reps for having not traditional leading man looks, but like the gravitas that they carried the roles with somehow sold it. And
Yeah, I kind of miss that quality actually. I don't feel like there's like nowadays. I think the difference is that they got the physical training is so good. You could take a guy who's not really athletic and
yeah,
like make a like a body. Whereas in the old days, Arnold Schwarzenegger couldn't really act, but because his physique was so impressive, like, hey, let's put
yeah.
him.
And and for that reason, like you said back then, if you were a professional athlete, like I mean, what Johnny Weissmuller,
Right?
the Tarzan for multiple generations of people, was like an Olympic level swimmer. So
Yeah. Well,
it,
Mike Henry was Tarzan. I think he was like an NFL player.
right, right. So these are like legitimate pathways to like becoming this, because that goes back to the fact that in Sword and Planet, just pulp overall, like physique is very important. The
Well, it's not just the physique in those old days too. Nowadays with special effects, guys can like look like Jackie Chan, but back
yeah,
then, if you didn't really know how to move and you weren't really agile, they couldn't really fake it on screen. If
right,
you didn't know how to throw a punch, if you didn't know how to jump across a room,
right.
there were limitations. Now they get with CGI and all that stuff. Anyone can jump around like Spider Man.
So I like those old serials. I like Buster Crab. I don't want to seem like I'm taking the piss out of the guy, because I have watched those, just as a kid. I watched them, and then later on, like when I was a teenager, right there on the tail end of like how VHS was starting to fade out, and DVDs and stuff were coming in. I mean, you could buy these things for a song. Like I bought the entire, like, what, and the thing was they always padded it. All that shit could have just been on one tape, but it was like
Yeah.
5 or 6 tapes worth of Flash Gordon conquers the universe, or Flash Gordon versus the purple space dust of Ming, or whatever. And I bought them, and I mean, not for nothing, in my misspent youth, and other friends of mine can attest. I mean, we would just sit around drinking and smoking, and we'd be like howling with laughter. And there's that whole teenage component of like, oh, I like this ironically, but at the same time, I
But I kind
didn't
of like it for real.
yeah, I didn't just like it ironically. I mean, there was something to it. And
I mean, that's the thing. You can only like something ironically to a point. You can't like it
yeah,
ironically for 6 hours.
no,
Um,
and the thing is just all of it. And it was probably a lot of the things that Lucas liked. I mean, I loved the title crawls, and Star Wars prepared me to love the title crawl, but the wipes and the
right.
just
Well, that's actually where George Lucas discovered. He didn't go to the serials as a kid. He discovered on TV, like we were saying earlier.
right.
These things were ran as TV shows. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying. There's some of it's just that. Yeah, I like those like Ultraman shows
Yes, I've
and
got
things
those
like
on
that. And
DVD. Those
it's
are
like
great.
honestly, the fact that it's doesn't have super slick production and special effects adds to the appeal to me. Like I like it. There's a camera. We got some guys in suits. Hit the film. Let's like we'll do it.
Yeah, let's smash this model city.
Right, exactly. And that's I think those old Flash Gordons have that quality, like the Adam West Batman show. It's just like it's goofy but there's an earnestness to it that I don't know. It's just there's just something to it. I can't really put my finger on why it's so enjoyable or why I like it better than special effects that are much better and acting that's much better of the modern day.
It's funny because my kids or whatever, they were misbehaving recently, and so no screens. You can't have any screens. You can't play with your tablets. You can't mess around with the iPad. None of it. And so they came out at one point, and they're like, well, what are we supposed to do? You've got the TV on. How can we not watch it while the TV is on? And like, I just had old Flash Gordon serials. I was like, I don't care if you watch this, because like it's
The
not,
ultimate
it's like
punishment.
right, it's black and white. It's not like cool special effects. It's just like very basic, like down to the bone, like not primitive storytelling, but this is the early days of cinema and stuff as well. But they'll sit there, they sit there and they watch it, and that's because it is engaging on some level. It's like, if you can get past it, it's not in color. If you can get past it, it doesn't have a bunch of cool CGI fights with people flipping around or whatever. It's like all of those basic components are there that they're in every cartoon you watch, they're in every fairy tale you read. On some level, it's just the evil
It's
emperor wants the girl, the sultry princess wants the hero is like faithful and loyal to this
it's
frowsy
it's
earth
uh
chick.
it's story, the special effects,
Yes,
all that's the window dressing, like people respond to the story, even if it's a story they've seen before, sometimes more strongly to a story they've seen before.
and it's not a commentary on, Buster Crabbe. It's not a commentary on Sam Jones. It just goes back to a degree to that interchangeableness of the leading man in some of these Sword and Planet productions overall. I feel like fine, if get in your time machine and if you could take Buster Crabbe and put him in that, Sam Jones role in the more modern movie, I don't feel like it would have appreciably changed the end product that much.
But you could kind of say that the reverse of the two actors who played Ming the Merciless, but but in a reverse way, because those guys were both so effing good as Ming the
Yes.
Merciless. It was
Yeah.
like the reverse. It's like those guys were like the Christopher Reeve and George Reeve of Ming the Merciless. Because I mean, like,
Well, you got
because
Charles
I was,
Middleton,
you
who
watch
did the one with Crabbe. Charles Middleton did,
right. I'm talking about the first Flash
yeah.
Gordon serial. I haven't seen the others yet.
But yeah, well, Charles Middleton, like, he continues that role for some time. Like, even when other like bit supporting actors might change, he was Ming for a good stretch of time, just as much as Crabbe was Flash.
So it was what, Max von Sydow or
Yep.
Sydow?
I pronounce it Max von Sydow because it sounds
Max
evil.
von Sydow. I mean, you're probably right. I'm not really overly familiar with him.
He's got a name like a James Bond villain, man. I mean,
right?
what are you gonna do?
You watch him in Flash, where you're like, God, this guy's perfect. He is perfect as Ming the Merciless. But then you watch the old serials, like, it's almost like he took a time machine back, because it's like, oh, they're both playing it so well and in a very similar way.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it's like the reverse of the two leading men, where they were good enough to be Flash Gordon. They got the point across, but man, it's like, I think where the 70s one has them beat, I mean, actually even Zarkov in the old one was pretty good too.
Yeah, that was Mike Shannon, I think was that guy's name. But
yeah, and they had like a blonde girl playing Dale Arden.
Yeah, and it was a dark-haired girl. Good. Yeah, and it's funny because the blonde-haired girl as the female lead, that was very much a product of the times. It's interesting that in the comic strip she did have dark hair. Maybe that was just cheaper. I don't know. And also Flash was already blonde, so maybe wanting to like mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was very much like Jane was blonde, and that so I think that that was associated with like sort of the virtuous leading lady at the time.
Wasn't the actress Maureen O'Sullivan, she wasn't blonde? So I think sometimes maybe that's the thing that's always irks comic book fans, who want like just the physique and the look is the most important thing. The movie directors, they probably just want like, who's the best actor and who will put butts in the seats. I don't care if they're blonde. I don't care if they've got this hair or that hair or whatever.
Well, not for nothing, Maureen O'Sullivan's physique was okay.
Yeah, she's not bad.
So
she had a career for a reason, and she did a good job as Jane. But yeah, it's funny too, because the whole thing about Dale having black hair and Flash having blonde hair. I was watching cartoonist Kayfabe on YouTube the other day, and they were mentioning how like he was like, "Gosh, there's a lot of gingers in these old 50s and 60s comics," and the other guy says, well, it's probably because there's a limited color palette. You're a blonde, you had black hair, you're red, and you needed that red just for variety. And that's probably why. Well, we've already made the guy blonde. We can't have them both be blonde.
And that makes sense. And those original Crabbe serials, they just like the later movie with Sam Jones follows the plot very faithfully. Some of those early Crabbe serials are really they're straight out of the comics as well.
Oh yeah,
within the limitations of what they could do. And that's the funny thing. Like there's so many other adaptations of different IPs and different different franchise characters, and stuff gets played with very fast and loose. Things get altered. This gets changed. This person's so and so's brother now or whatever. But with the Flash Gordon stuff, they for some reason they really like took pains to keep it faithful to the story material.
I think it's probably a benefit of. I'm going to guess that the people producing it or writing it were just fans of the strip, or they were just like, here's the story and let's just adapt it, instead of like with comic books, it's just like they're not really kind of told in a movie-esque kind of way. Like, there's like with a lot of the old golden and silver age characters, there's like, here's the 8-page origin or the 5-page origin, and here's like these, and they have these little tiny blocks of stories that would kind of continue on. With Flash Gordon, it was like kind of had a very serial quality that could lend itself to a movie.
Yeah, it had a
Um,
sprawling epic, and each of the like strips typically ended with the cliffhanger that would be necessary to keep people on the hook for the next one, which was the same business principle between the serials and the newspaper strip. So yeah, absolutely, that makes perfect
and
sense.
there's a reason like so many of the elements have been cribbed by like from John Carter to it's just the hero gets to the planet, he gets captured. Like you think about it, like why tell the story any other way?
This is true. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And it gets really good. I mean, just during the break, I was flipping back through some of the pages, and it's funny because there are later portions of the strip that I would love to discuss. But like even just in the first collection, if you like this one here, it's Flash Gordon by Alex Raymond, Volume 1, Mongo, Planet of Doom. This is like the old kitchen sink press like publication, and it's literally just the first 82 strips.
Let me see the cover so I know which one you're talking about. Okay. Yeah.
It's got that on the back.
Yep. I
And
used to
it's
have
like,
that one.
yeah, and it's the hardbound. I like it. I bought this at I don't know if they're still in business, but I bought it at I think it was called Dragon's Lair or Dragon's Wing Comics down in Jacksonville, Florida, in the Neptune Beach area. It's a nice little shop. If it's still
Nice.
in
I bought
business,
I bought mine in Florida as well.
right? So if it's still in business, shout out to those guys. Go buy some comics from them. But and there's just so much that happens in these, like, because this is the thing. We've talked about like the adventure, the story, like how the environment, the planet Mongo is kind of the star. We've mentioned how Charles Middleton and Max von Sydow both did great Ming the Mercilesses, and the beauty of that is that you got to have a good villain, and
Yeah.
and to a degree, like maybe stuff like John Carter suffered a little because some of those villains were like a little replaceable. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they just like John
Well, I mean,
Carter
but
and Mars and the
well, could
Tharks
you
just
say though that like because eventually Ming is defeated in Flash Gordon, and is there another truly memorable
no,
villain that
no.
even comes close to Ming?
Well, no, he comes back. He comes back
Ah,
multiple times, and Ming also apparently was, you know, people always talk about like in the new Star Wars sequels, like when did Emperor Palpatine have time to have kids? Well, Ming had time because apparently
right.
he had more than one. I mean, like nephews and sons and like other grandsons and inheritors of Ming pop up from time to time. But this is the thing, they're all just like a pale shadow of that first guy. That's what it's all about, is attempting to recapture the menace and the omnipresence of because
It's interesting. You were they say heroes is only as good as his villain, and I just saw something the other day about how some of the writers or one of the writers on the Batman animated series would approach writing the scripts. He would approach the scripts as if the villain was the protagonist of the story,
yeah, yeah,
and
absolutely.
and Batman was kind of the foil to the protagonist, except the foil wins.
Right. Yeah. Well, how are you going? What is the complication that is going to thwart the plan of the quote unquote protagonist? And in that sense, Flash Gordon was always like the cosmically sized spanner, the monkey wrench getting tossed into the works of anything that Ming wanted to do. And the beauty of it is like I said, the omnipresence of the villain. He's almost, I won't say like diabolical or satanic, but it does approach a mythic level because he's everywhere. One of the things that I always loved about the Flash Gordon stuff was that there were always like spies and traitors and people that can be bribed, or somebody that, for whatever reason hated Flash and was willing to turn him in or otherwise inform on his location or plans to Ming. And that has like that's good because it plays, you always hear about the villain being a tyrant, but how often do you really get that sense of like there are spies and informants? It's a police state.
Right.
There's kind of like an apparatus of an intelligence agency that's actively working against the hero who is the enemy of the state.
There
And
is a satanic quality to the Ming the Merciless of the '70s movie. He has that red suit. He has
yeah,
the goatee.
yeah,
He put a couple horns on his head,
yep.
and there you go.
And
And and that cowl actually has like a horns.
yep.
So I mean, he's you're not far off when you say satanic.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that he is everywhere. He's always watching. There's always, like, just when Dale and Flash and Zarkov think they're getting a breath and they can pause for a minute, like there's always another little fleet of ships flying in and like carpet bombing the forest where they're trying to hide.
Right.
And that is what was part of what was great about the series. There was a militarism to it. There was always like gadgets and devices and new weaponry and stuff. And it's fun seeing that. It's just fun seeing like the writer and or artist being able to just indulge themselves in whatever they want. Like in those first 82 strips, there's a dehumanizing machine, because initially, like Ming says, the reason why they're so much more advanced than humans is to they're not hampered by kindness, mercy, pity. And so he wants Dale to be like them, and he's about to zap her with a dehumanizing machine that's going to remove all of her human emotions. There's when the Lion Men show up, I love this. The Lion Men, their vehicles are not the typical rockets that you see in most of the Mongo stuff. They have flying saucers with serrated edges, so they're like giant flying buzz saws.
Right.
Which is brilliant in and of itself. But then, like in the big battle that pops up in these early strips, the Ming's forces use these giant electromagnetic rays, and they would grab the saucers and they would pull them into the path of a second beam, which is being shot by a disintegration device. And so, like I love this idea of like punch, counter punch, like this is the cool weapon and this is the counter to the cool weapon. And there's a lot of that. And then I love how Aura laughs, because like all of the serrated flying saucers start to get melted and destroyed or whatever, and all the Lion Men are dying, and Aura's off in the corner in one panel, and she's like, haha, that'll teach those barbarians to stay in their country.
You're actually you're kind of running through this kind of put something into my mind about kind of the brilliance of the Flash Gordon strip in terms of the story devices, because typically with Sword and Planet, the story devices, he falls in love with a girl.
Right.
The girl ends up getting kidnapped and that's the whole, like I said, the milieu is the whole what's the word? The point of the story, basically. So that's why, so he kidnaps the girl and they have to go across these exotic lands and meet these exotic people, to get to the girl. With Flash Gordon, the problem with that kind of story for us ongoing serial like Flash Gordon is that eventually you got to get the girl, and then once you get the girl, there's no need to continue exploring the land. With a villain like Ming the Merciless, though, like he's constantly there. Okay, we have a hideout. It's getting bombed out. We got to go to another hideout. Right. We got to go to this land. We got to get allies to rebel against Ming the Merciless. So he kind of just being in that super authoritarian, super powerful police state, kind of really creates that need to travel the world of Mongo and explore new lands. So it's kind of a brilliant alternative way of doing it.
Yeah, Ming's one of the classics. I think that whenever people talk about like all-time great villains in science fiction or comics or both, he gets overlooked a good bit. And that's also because he is largely a relic of like an earlier time period. But if you read this source material, it just goes back. It's compelling. It sells itself. You can just shut off your brain and just like go along for the ride, and you're never going to have a dull moment. Like falling from the river, going over the waterfall, getting pulled out of the thing by like some submarine or whatever. There's always something crazy happening.
Yeah, the thing is with like the older stuff is that the villains were a little bit broader. Nowadays, if they were going to do Ming the Merciless, we'd have to like delve into his childhood.
Yes.
We'd have to learn more about his kind of like
his tragic backstory, and he did it all for
tragic backstory, and he'd have like kind of a philosophy, and there'd be a scene where he sits down with the hero and he explains his whole life philosophy. When I was a boy, my father didn't like glass menagerie, and his and like explain how that led to him becoming a fascist,
Right.
There'd be a scene like that, whereas like back then it was just like, I want the girl, he's got the girl, I have to get rid of him, and that was it. And what's crazy about that is, as simple as that is, it's very human, it's very relatable. You understand that motivation fundamentally, I think, a lot more than some of the more highfalutin motivations where they've got this unique philosophy of life and they're the secret hero of their own stories, kind of thing.
Yeah, and Ming was just utterly despicable anyway. Like I definitely remember a scene where one of the many traitors that I mentioned, I think it was in the first compilation of Flash Gordon strips that I ever read, which was actually the Water World of Mongo. It was like a hardbound, cloth covered compilation. Beautiful black and white artwork. It's really what kind of started me on my whole love affair with the character and the franchise overall. But in it, at one point, a woman named Sonya, who wanted Flash but couldn't have him. So you have the spurned woman kind of angle for the motivation for the character, but she eventually betrays the resistance, who are hiding out on an island which is it's full of crypts and sepulchers from where like the royalty of Mongo are buried, and they come up with this idea that that's the perfect place to hide out. So they're like on this island in these weird like subterranean chambers, and Sonya betrays Ming initially for money, and then eventually Ming has to agree to marry her so that she'll become Empress of Mongo, so that they can defeat Flash or whatever. And Ming keeps his word and marries her, and literally like in the next panel he's walking off, he's like, guards, take her and execute her. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? Oh, how can you do this to me? And he's like, I kept my word, I married you, now kill her. And I mean, and these are like just stone cold like moments with the character, and it really adds something because he's just so duplicitous, he's so like heartless, and there's just a lot of great moments like that. And
he is merciless, I guess.
right. And that betrayal, I'm pretty sure, is what led to Flash eventually being captured. And it led to the moment that a lot of people remember from the movie where they put him in the gas chamber type thing, and presumably the hero is publicly executed, as one does when you have an upstart rebel to the power of the imperial throne of Mingo. You publicly execute them, but Aura, through her like connivances, with like the help of a doctor, introduces a drug into the thing to where he can be revived. And it's one of those moments that I love, where I know I talked about the other time we were chatting about those weird coincidence of John Clayton, John Carter, Jesus Christ, like parallels. But in a similar thing happens in Flash Gordon, the dying and reborn hero. He's executed, they bury him in a sepulcher, and when he's woken up by the loyalists and spirited away again, before he leaves a marking on the outside of the tomb. And this falls back on that whole everyone speaks English everywhere. Due to the homophonic similarity between the two words, it's here lies Flash Gordon. And when Flash Gordon escapes, he graffitiizes the tomb to where the epitaph reads Ming lies -- as in signed by Flash Gordon. And it's like, oh no, the tomb is empty, Flash Gordon has risen again, let's go get an Easter basket and collect some eggs. So it adds to that, to that whole thing of there is kind of an Arthurian quality to it, or a mythic character that dies and rises again, and Flash Gordon's got that.
Oh yeah, I mean, like a lot of the stuff from that era was heavily influenced by the King Arthur. That was like a big thing back then. Prince Valiant obviously is one of the more famous examples, but just various serials. Robin Hood, Knights of the. It's that medieval stuff was way big back then.
And it's a key component of the Flash Gordon stuff, because no matter how technically advanced they are functionally operating in this feudal system. There's even a point where like the Great Tournament of Death, which was like a big story arc towards the end of those original strips, at one point, Prince Baron enters as like the masked contestant. Like nobody knows who the guy is at first, and that's that part of that tradition of the mystery night. Showing up at the tournament and nobody knows who he is. And then it's revealed, oh, it's Baron, but I don't want to fight you. And it's like, yeah, but whoever wins gets Aura. And at the end of it, instead of Flash and Baron killing one another, and it's, again, the faithfulness of these adaptations, it's on like a platform with knife blades that pop up out of the floor, and so on. Voltan, and then Jugrid, who is the father of Thun, the Lion Man, who's probably most familiar to people from the Filmation series. But King Jugrid of the Lion Men and King Voltan of the Hawkmen, they approach Ming and they say, we're declaring it a tie. It doesn't matter how powerful you are. Like if our kingdoms decide to revolt with the way Flash has got everybody fired up, you'll be overthrown. So just don't kill Flash, don't kill Baron, and just declare the tournament over. And Ming, and I love that because it gets back to the politics and the kind of ebb and flow of power structures within this alien environment. Ming's like, they got a point. So instead of them being killed and executed, each of them is given a kingdom to conquer. And Flash is sent to the underground kingdom of Mongo, and that's the beginning. Because it's funny in the film, since he's already got this very Sherwood of the Robin Hood of Sherwood like vibe. Baron's already in Arborea, but in the strip, Baron goes to conquer Arborea, and Flash goes to conquer the underground kingdom, and it's like, yeah, this is your reward. I'm sending you off to, like, be colonial, like, colonizers for me.
Yeah.
And but again, it's that feudal slash medieval system of, like, I'm giving you this kingdom to rule in my name. So, like, even though you're kind of against me, it's a very Dune thing almost, which of course Dune coming decades later, but that weird, Renaissance jockeying for power kind of thing. I like it. It's Machiavellian. It's cool.
So yeah, and while you're on, you brought up Filmation. I kind of wanted to. I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of the lost, because everyone remembers this, or every Flash Gordon fan fondly remembers the serial as they remember the movie. But I felt like the Filmation series was actually one of probably of the major adaptations, might have been the most faithful of them all in a lot of ways. And I
Filmation
love
was
this.
incredible. I mean, those were great. I watched those as a kid for
Well, the
whatever
movie. Have
reason.
you seen the made for TV movie? Because it's only
Yes.
been released in. It was on YouTube for a bit, but it was like the only official release it got was in Japan of all places. I didn't know. Who knew there was a Flash Gordon falling to Japan? I like it.
Well, I
But
mean, for whatever reason, it seemed like it didn't play a lot where I lived, but whenever I visited, like, my Nana in Pennsylvania, it was like always on television. So
really,
that's where I remember watching it. And I remember the made for TV movie. And for whatever reason, one of the scenes that's most, like, vividly etched in my mind was, like, the big idol. And I think he's in the
yeah.
underground kingdom, and
I
they're
love
like,
the design of those blue ape men.
yes, yeah, like they look like Morlocks. I mean, they were just
Right.
very
Yeah. I mean, it
cool.
was a beautiful. Honestly, I grew up with Masters of the Universe. I watched Brave Star. I watched a lot of Filmation shows growing up. But upon rewatching them as an adult, the one that really holds up as an entertaining show is Flash Gordon.
Yeah.
It's. I think it's Filmation's best adventure series by a country mile.
Yeah, and again, also another very faithful adaptation for the most part. I mean, there were a few things tossed in there or changed around a little, but very consistent, just very
Maybe
consistent.
it's just because Flash Gordon was beloved by a lot of the people who adapted him. He was kind of it was a hugely popular strip. The thing is with like Superman and Batman and all these other adaptation of comic book superheroes, they have a much smaller original audience. It's comic book
Yeah,
fans, and if you piss them off, who cares? They're just a bunch of
right.
nerds. Whereas Flash Gordon was in the Sunday strip of every major newspaper for decades. People loved him. People wanted to see that story on the film. It's kind of like they were treating it more like they were adapting a book rather than
Yes,
a comic book. So with the comic book, it seems like they tend to say, like, we just need the costume and the name. Everything else is interchangeable. Whereas with Flash Gordon, it's like, well, millions upon millions of people have read these Flash Gordon strips. We better not veer too far from the social. If they even thought that we were going to veer, because I wouldn't be surprised if most of the people who adapted them were fans. The guys at Filmation were.
absolutely.
Dear Lawrence, we were talking about how he was a fan of Flash Gordon. And, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the guys who made the serials read Flash Gordon in their own newspapers
Of
and loved it.
course. Yeah. And I just like the consistency of it because there's just so many other characters and so many other intellectual properties where every time you watch something, you get this sense that somehow this is another echo out of oral history. This is another fragmented version of the myth. This is a particular, like, kind of local spin on the time honored story.
Right.
And with Flash, there's very much a consistent through line to a lot of it. At
It's
least in
got,
the
like I
early
admit,
days.
it's kind of like the King Arthur story. There's a lot of adaptations of King Arthur, but in every single one, he's a poor boy. He pulls the sword from the stone. He's betrayed by Guinevere and
Yep,
Lancelot. It's like there's a lot of like leeway in between these, like, but the characters, the story elements, the relationships, those kind of foundational aspects of the mythology are still there. And I think that's true with Flash Gordon.
absolutely. And to a degree, like, even after there was a sense of a certain amount of progress. It wasn't like a lot of modern comics where it's in real time and things develop. I mean, there was a certain status quo that was almost always maintained, but especially in the early days, there was some progress. Princess Aura eventually overcomes her obsession with Flash. She falls in with Baron. People are familiar with this from the movies, etc. But they wind up having a son, which I thought was interesting because I guess they're officially married, so they're allowed to have sexual congress and produce offspring. But, like, Flash and Dale are never officially married, so they never, like, settle down. And I guess that's part of, like, story wise what leaves things open for there's always the predatory female character, usually the queen of whatever particular environment they're in at that time.
Yeah.
to like kind of come after Flash. And I guess they didn't, perhaps like story wise, they just didn't want to be seen to assaulting the traditional mores of like a marriage. So like
Well, I
Flash
think
and
it
Dale.
also ages the character. So like, it's kind of like how Burroughs thought that marrying Tarzan and Jane was a mistake because
Yes. And
they
it
get
was.
married. So what's the next thing that has to happen? Korak, he has a son, Korak, and then
Yep.
they have to get the son up. So eventually, you're unintentionally turning Tarzan into an old man. He's not the
Yes.
young, vigorous jungle killer. He's a dad now on
Yeah.
a
And
ranch
that,
with his wife.
and speaking as a dad, that changes things, of course, so
Yeah.
so
Well, I mean,
it does
you're
keep the
like
character young and fresh. Absolutely.
right. When you have kids, like a lot of the stuff that these superheroes do is quite irresponsible, actually.
But it also it served to rehabilitate the Aura character, because now she's not such a like sexual vamp. It's like, oh, she's settled down, she's married, she has a kid, she can
Not
be trusted.
interesting anymore.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And she can be trusted around Flash now. So like they kind of formed this core unit of what eventually became like the resistance or the rebellion against Ming, where, Baron was always kind of just like waiting for an opportunity to jump in, because functionally Baron was actually the heir to the throne. And that's what's funny, is that Baron was the legitimate heir to the throne of Mongo, who had been deposed by like Ming's machinations, which also suggests to me that on some level they must somehow be related. But I mean, maybe not. But I mean that
If
yeah, that makes the marriage to Aura problematic. We don't want to get
well,
all like
actually, I
House of
guess
the
in a
Dragon
Game of
on it.
Thrones kind of way,
Yeah,
it would make
yeah.
it historically accurate too.
But the thing is that even with Baron being in charge during those like periods where Ming, he's always thought to be dead, or this something blew up, or he's in prison and exiled. Even though like Baron was nominally in charge, like it was Flash, it was a Warlord of Mars scenario. You're the outsider that's come and united all of the warring factions. So like, we love Baron, but you're really in charge, Flash.
Right.
And that's consistent with the Sword and Planet formula.
So I guess it seemed like the kind of swan song of Flash Gordon as a pop culture figure was uh, the 1980 movie or
Yeah,
1979.
there was
80 or
a
81, I can't remember which one, but that seemed like the Sci-Fi Channel tried to do a TV series and they probably went too far off the beaten path.
yes,
That was
yeah.
probably the major media adaptation that I didn't see it, but I read some of the synopsis and it just seemed like it was not what the other
I
ones
tried
were.
watching a few episodes, and I don't know, like that, like people online were calling him Mino, Mino, Ming in name only, because he didn't look like Ming. He's like this blonde Eric Roberts looking guy. His main henchman's like this 8 foot tall Billy Corrigan, looking dude. Like,
Oh,
yeah, I mean, he had a bald head. If you put a guitar in his hand, he would have been singing lead for Smashing
they
Pumpkins.
should have had that guy grow
Yeah.
a mustache and he could have been Ming. They
But
should have got Billy Corrigan to play Ming.
right, but it wasn't great. And there were other things. There were like attempts to reboot it, cartoon adaptations where I don't know, like they were teenagers like hoverboarding through the sky
Oh, I
and
remember
stuff.
that one. The 90s
Yeah.
animated. Oh, I guess like before we
So there's that one, and then like, what was the other adaptation that I'm thinking of? Oh, Defenders of the Earth.
oh, that was my introduction to
Yeah.
Flash Gordon.
Yeah, man, we got to talk about Defenders of the Earth. That combines all of the great stuff, because it's like all of these King Features syndicates, heroes, including the Phantom, who of course is badass.
Well,
But
that was my favorite one.
yeah, you got Phantom, you got Mandrake the Magician, you got Lothar, you got Flash. I mean, and there was all the usual stupid cartoon stuff with the cute little alien sidekick.
There's actually some pretty cool stuff in that series, though. I remember watching like they adapted a couple of the comic strip storylines
Yeah.
from the Phantom pretty faithfully.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and who could forget that effect, with the power of 10 tigers? Like,
Oh yeah, that was not faithful, but that was my
wasn't
first exposure to
faithful,
the
but who
Phantom
didn't
as
love
well.
that?
But like I was disappointed when I was like, that's the one thing I wanted the Phantom. I like the 10 tigers.
Yeah, man.
That's like his golden star in Super Mario.
But that was the thing. It's like it might have not been faithful, but it was so worth it. I like every time.
Well,
it
it does have like there was like Old Jungle saying that the Phantom has the strength of 10 tigers.
Right.
That was in the original strip, but he didn't summon magical powers. You're making me want to watch Flash Gordon, though,
right?
to be honest.
Right. All right. So we've been covering a lot of great ground. One of the last things that we were talking about was Defenders of the Earth.
Yep.
and it's just fun, you know.
Out of the sky, a rocket ignites, goes into battle, faster than light. Written by
Yeah.
Stan Lee.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, it's like that theme song couldn't be any better if, you know, unless like Frank Stallone was singing it, you know.
Who could afford that though?
But I'm actually friends with one of the guys that worked on that show. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Will Mugino, I guess I'm
Yeah.
gonna guess is how you pronounce it. Apparently he was one of the producers or like animation supervisors for it. So yeah, he mentions Defenders of the Earth. Yeah, not a ton. It's not the only thing he's hanging his hat on. Apparently he had his hand in a lot of 80s like cartoon stuff, like apparently all the way right up until like the Spider-Man Unlimited show, which I guess was
Oh
in
wow.
the 90s. But so I'm certainly not going to talk bad about it because I don't want my friend to get angry with me. But you know, and he's
Oh
probably
man,
sitting
what's there to talk bad about? It was
well, no, I
wonderful.
mean he's probably sitting there thinking like, you know, friend, who is this guy?
Yeah.
But well, I mean, what is there to talk bad about? You know, it had some of the stuff going on that like everything had at that point.
Right, right.
The weird little monkey with like antenna or whatever being the cute, you know, animal character.
You don't
And
like a hilariously awkward sidekick?
and you know, and this is the thing again in trying to introduce notes of diversity, but you know, the little kid that was Mandrake's like ward or whatever, I really feel like he was a forerunner of Heart, you know, from Captain Planet. So
Oh,
yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason
it
those
was a
two.
huge improvement on Lothar, though. I actually thought like I liked the design of Lothar, and I thought like, oh, they could have turned him into the team's Doc Savage.
Yeah, I could see that, and that's the thing. I mean, but
Well, he was
then
kind of like the like I don't know, wasn't he like the mechanic or something along those lines? He had
yeah,
like a
yeah.
technology thing. So that to me is kind of Doc Savage esque.
Well, it is, but the thing is like visually, and then honestly, with like a significantly more limited skill set than Doc Savage. If Lothar is Doc Savage, where does that leave, you know, Flash Gordon to go?
He's
You
John
know,
Carter. He's like he's not the brains of the outfit. You know, he's not Reed Richards. He's like the
right?
man of action. You know, he's Johnny Storm.
I actually like that analogy. He is very a Johnny Storm type character. He's a little older and a little less, you know, like I don't want to say feeble because it's not that Johnny was feeble, but you know, he's not prey to like that kind of inconstancy that you associate with like an adolescent character, you know,
Right.
but there is a Johnny Storm quality to him. And yeah, that had some oddball kind of stuff, like what Ming he sucked Dale's soul out of her body, and then like Dale's soul got put into the supercomputer that like helped them, you know, like figure out whatever it was Ming was up to at the time.
Right. That old
And
chestnut.
yeah, right. You know, as one does when you're a villain, you suck people's souls out, and then
Right.
you know
Put them into
their
computers.
husband who's grieving, you know, implants their soul into a computer.
I
It's
think we've all been there.
right. I mean, you know, it's like if you can't have someone warming your bed, you can at least have like the hologram of Dynac 7, or
All right.
because that was what killed me, was that she was fused with this computer, but like they stopped calling her Dale. You know, like, you're not my wife anymore. You're a computer. You know, I don't know. But beyond that, though, overall, it was a lot of fun. I thought it was good, and I don't know what it was like in your area. And again, like you said, you were in Korea a lot, so you know
It was
that like
in the AFRTS would play it. That's how I got it. You know, they would I guess find various types of. I didn't ever saw Transformers. I don't know if they ever played it or not, but I know I never saw it. Yeah, I just enjoyed it. I remember I wrote to my grandmother to send me the Phantom was my favorite.
right, of
So to send
course.
me the Phantom, I was I like Snake Eyes. I like the Mystery Men. You know, that was my favorite as a kid. So I got the Phantom. It had this really awkward action feature where there was like a twist, like a knob on the back of his,
Right.
in his back, and to like rotate his fist. And even as a kid, I'm like, I don't need this thing to rotate his fists. I
Right.
have hands.
Right. This is actually impeding my play.
Right. Like, yeah, it's like, what is the point of this? Like, he got stabbed in the back and he never took it out. Like,
I love it. I mean, here's the thing. I almost want to say that I remember watching it on Army TV as well, because living in Korea, because I was over there for a while with my dad, and it's like there just wasn't much on. There wasn't much to pick from. It's like we talked
we had
earlier
one
in the
channel.
podcast about how back in the day you just took what science fiction you could get, whereas now in the modern era we have this embarrassment of riches. But it didn't matter. Like if that was what was on and it fulfilled some kind of need for genre fiction, you partook of it. And so
Right.
if you
I
take
watched the
that,
Three Stooges meet Hercules.
right, but if you take that and you multiply that feeling times like 1,000, that's what it was like to watch Army television. back in the day. But so Defenders of the Earth, and I liked it because it did that thing of, it wasn't League of Extraordinary Gentlemen per se, like, but it kind of, it forced all of these different franchises to kind of cooperate in the shared universe. And of course, to a degree, there was a point in time where I liked that kind of thing a little more than I do now. I think as I get older, I kind of like, when stuff just sort of operates in its own individual.
Well, I think that we're in like everything's a shared universe. It's like I remember reading, was it The Great Comic Book Heroes by Jules Pfeiffer?
Right.
The whole thing about shared universes, it's cool to see your hero meet the other hero, but there's kind of something cool about being the one last hope of the world.
Absolutely. God, I'm gonna have to go back through and flip through my copy now because I love that. That's it. That's
I reread that
about.
recently. It's very well written. It's a great book. It's that guy, because I read it as a kid,
Yeah.
And I kind of took the historical stuff, but reading it as an adult, I was like, man, this guy was really witty, and he had a really great bouncy prose style. I think you'll really enjoy it if you do a reread.
Well, I've read it multiple times, man. I mean, it's like that was one of the first ones that came home from the library and never went back. I blame it now on my parents. They're always moving around. Right. I didn't always have time to return these things to the library. Sure. They just accidentally wound up in a box, and they were 3 states away before you knew what happened.
Right.
But that was one, and the Flash Gordon one was another one. And I'm probably into it for espionage or something, because I took that one from a Navy library.
So. Yeah, I would. You still, because I would love to see one of those black and white ones, because man, I really like looking at the line work.
Well, it was really nice, man. It is. It's really, really good stuff. And speaking of the difference between the black and white line work and the color stuff, because some of these other ones, and some of these, obviously the prints are taken from photos of the printed material. So it has that god awful 1930s, 1940s coloring where it's always a few centimeters to the left or the right of where it needs to be. And it spoils what to me is a very salacious moment early on in the strip. But when Flash and Baron are given their 2 kingdoms to conquer, Flash goes to the underground kingdom of Mongo. And the thing is, that place has already got a queen. That's what I love about it. It's Ming sent him there knowing there was somebody else in charge already. But
you compare it to colonialism.
Yeah,
there are a lot of places where already had someone in charge. Yeah, it's the British didn't care.
Yeah, if this guy's making problems for me, he's really going to give this bitch some trouble. So there's this whole thing where it's Queen Azura, who's the queen of magic, or the witch people of the underworld, and this borders briefly upon something that we should probably touch on in another podcast, but Abraham Merritt. It has a very Abraham Merritt vibe. This underground kingdom, this queen that's skilled in magic. The hero drinks this potion that makes him lose his memory and forget that he's in love with the faithful Dale Arden, and he falls in love with the evil queen. And there's just something very Duianu and Dwellers in the Mirage about it to me.
I definitely feel that.
And in fact, the forward to the black and white edition that I have of the Water World of Mongo briefly represents or briefly references the fact that some of those early Flash Gordon stories partook of what was called a hidden race fiction that Abraham Merritt was the king of.
Well, we mentioned earlier was Don Moore was the writer, and he was a pulp writer. So he was probably hired for a reason. And it's probably because, all that stuff is just Tom Sholey says they're swimming in the waters,
But the thing is about the coloring is that there's a scene where Dale is kept kind of in bondage or serving drinks while Flash, and he's been brainwashed. And he's hanging, the good life. We're running this place. Who's this girl? And Dale tries to explain to Flash who he really is. And later that evening, Dale's pulled out of the slave quarters, and she's given a lashing by a couple of this queen's Amazon broads or whatever. And the thing is that this is a very kind of, to me, risque scene for this is a Sunday strip that was showing up in Homes.
Right. Well, I guess it's kind of one of those things how people could kind of take it at face value.
Yeah.
So, some people it's kind of how there was a lot of bondage and lesbianism hinted at in the early Wonder Womans.
Right.
But I'm sure all the kids. the kids back then were just taking it at face value, like, yeah, she's getting whipped because that's who wants to be whipped, you know?
Right. But the thing is that the coloring on this particular scene like ruins it, because like I can see this like gorgeous line art by like Raymond of this like, ooh, this is like something that would be on like the cover of like Argosy or one of those Margaret Brundage like, Pulp Fiction
Right.
covers. And it's awful. The coloring on it is just terrible. And it's like I hate it. It murders me because I'm like, I want to see the black and white version of this picture, just for research
Yeah,
purposes.
of course, of course.
Right.
Yeah, the Titan reprints do a nice job of. I mean, they're gorgeous. I got those are the volumes I have now. I highly recommend them to anyone. They're affordable, relatively.
Flash. He's kind of one thing that might be fun to touch on is, we've talked about how significant and important it is, and how it's like one of these key newspaper strips in the history of comics and the influence he had on comic artists. But Flash Gordon is arguably one of the most swiped things in existence. I mean, it's just like, and it's not just like the pose of Batman swinging on the wire on the cover of Detective Comics or whatever. It's the fact that like, the Hawkmen of Mongo. I mean, there you go. Now you got Hawkman. And there's just so many different like costumes and characters to where like even the people that were involved in producing the material back in the day would, they openly admit it. They're like, oh, hey, I saw like a really cool costume in like Flash Gordon today, so we're just going to turn.
I mean, look at Jor-El's suit.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, basically, it's kind of like how everything, like when Star Wars came out, like everything had that look for a while. Everything sci-fi, like you see it, like everything.
Yep.
After Flash Gordon has a vague resemblance to Flash Gordon, like the rocket ship that Kal-El took, looks like a rocket ship from Flash Gordon. The planet Krypton looks like the planet Mongo in a lot of ways,
Absolutely.
Like, it's just one of those things, it set the style for decades onward. I was gonna say, I was kind of like talking about what, Sword Planet could do to get back into like some of the zeitgeist. And I think, Flash Gordon is a character. You always hear stories about reboots. Probably one of the most recent ones I've heard is that I don't know how to say his name, but he was the director of Thor Ragnarok.
Right.
I don't know, it was originally going to be an animated movie, but now they might do a live action movie. But you hear it periodically, like every few years. But I was going to say, it's one of these things that it's a property that seems like it's always in production.
Yeah.
And yet never comes to theaters. And I'm just wondering, is Flash Gordon's time past, or do you think someone could kind of dust the old boy off and make him relevant again?
I mean, obviously the two Ted movies, there are things that happen periodically, and a lot of it hinges upon, referencing, the movie version from, the early 80s or whatever. But there's something that keeps it alive. There's something that keeps people coming back to it. It does get rediscovered in some form, over and over again. And, it's funny because like, even the fact that it just like, not that Buck is a real, well, it's not that it's not a realistic name, but it's like just something in the difference between the similarities and yet the differences between the names. Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, I don't know. It's like, it's a flashier property. It just in some way it is. And I don't think its time has passed. I think it'll resurface again in some way. I mean, especially because, the people that own that's just the nature of modern entertainment. If you have one of these IP cash cows, as long as it keeps giving milk, if there's some way, it doesn't matter if it's, milk, yogurt, cheese, whatever, whatever form it takes. If you can continue milking that cash cow, they're going to do it,
Yeah, I actually think Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers have the same problem in that the names do sound dated to, I think, the modern ear,
Yeah.
Like back then, Flash would be, kind of a cool sounding nickname, but today it's like, that's a little, and Buck definitely is.
Buck Rogers sounds like he's, a redneck. I mean, like, which would be a funny take on Buck Rogers, quite honestly.
Buck Rogers sounds like a porn star's name to me.
Well, they did that with Flash Gordon, but that was again Flash Gordon.
Flash Gordon, yeah. Boy, William Stout drew such a beautiful poster for that movie. I was like, man, I wish this guy was drawing Flash Gordon.
Right. I mean, and it's fun, like
we should touch on that before we sign off. The artists,
go for it.
I mean, Mac Raboy, Al Williamson, who are some of the other guys who have drawn Flash Gordon over the years? Yeah, Austin Briggs,
I mean,
Evan,
he did the daily and then he moved over to doing the Sunday strip, and it's really great stuff, you know.
Alex Raymond did a whole kind of a bunch of redesigns for a Dynamite miniseries. Then Evan Shaner came in and he did a take on Flash Gordon. It's just one of those books that's had no shortage of great artists who have like kind of wanted to do that book and then just done a great job with it.
Because Raymond set the bar very high. That's not to say that other people could not do as good a job, and indeed did. Some people even prefer Raboy's work to Raymond. You know, there's a whole school of people that feel that way.
I love his work, but I mean, I think
I'm not one of them, but I understand that there are people that feel that way. But the thing is, and we mentioned this in the previous podcast, you really, it attracted top talent. You had to be at like the apogee of your powers to be the guy.
Yeah, it's like a Burroughs property, like how Tarzan is always attracts the top guys.
Yep. And there's places it could go yet, but even if it didn't, even if we'd seen the last Flash Gordon property to ever be produced, like I'm content with the backlog of material that exists, you know, and there's plenty of stuff in there. I mean, like you could literally, like, we just in the amount of talking we've done, over an hour or more worth of material, and we've barely like scratched the surface of like all the different adventures, all the different characters, and the way that the stories that were done at those times reflected what was going on, you know.
And a lot of that stuff still has yet to be collected. You know, I don't know that every Austin Briggs Flash Gordon has been collected. I know that the Dark Horse did 4 volumes of the Mac Rayboy stuff, and it was in black and white though, you know, which is good for me. You know, as someone that dabbles in art, I like seeing that stuff. But I know that, you know, purists would want to see the original colors.
This is the Austin Briggs one that I have. This is the dailies.
I have that one.
And I love this one. I actually, in some ways, I appreciate the dailies even more than the Sunday one, because they had so much less room to work with, and they still pack so much into just like a handful of panels, you know. And things just keep rolling and changing. Like, what this actually has, one of my more favorite storylines, which I think they called it the Avenging Shadow, and that's where a scientist that's hiding in a cave has perfected like turning people invisible, and he makes Flash invisible. So there's an entire whole sequence of the daily Flash Gordon strip where Flash Gordon never appears, and he's just beating up dudes that are like, you know, like
that was actually in the original serial.
Right. You know, I mean, and this is fun stuff because it's inventive. Because one, I don't even have to draw the hero; I can just draw this guy getting punched. You know, and like one of the weaknesses of that particular scientific development was like, I guess he's invisible, but somehow he still casts a shadow. So I guess like technically he's
well,
like
that's how it's a visual tell for the reader.
Yeah, you know, but it's like, so Flash isn't really invisible. He's just doing some chameleon predator thing with his like skin or whatever. But and that's the thing. Like I can read this and it's not the original creator, but the premise is strong enough and the art is strong enough that it just maintains and it just continues to like produce story elements, and a lot of it's repetitive, where it attempts to like recapture the glory of those early strips. Like they introduce a new prince or a new princess or a new race of people, and they're really just a variation of the old ones, but somehow it's
hard to capture that original. It's like the John Carter novels. You know, there's some really cool stuff in the later ones. There's really cool stuff, but you know, just it really is, so that original novel and then that original trilogy, it's so hard to go back and capture that again in the same property. You know, you're almost better off inventing something new. I think the one thing we gotta touch on though, actually, I know we've been on for a while, is what if George Lucas got that license and didn't create Star Wars?
Oh, well, I mean, for one thing, if he had gotten that license, I think that based on the special effects, the presentation, everything that Industrial Light and Magic was doing to kind of revolutionize how science fiction / fantasy was projected or was presented in the cinema, if George Lucas had gotten that license, people would still be talking about Flash Gordon today.
Yeah.
Flash Gordon.
I wonder if he would have been less daring. Because when it's your own property, less daring. Like when it's your own property, you know, like you're kind of like willing to do something different. You want it to look different, but like, would nostalgia have been handcuffed to him?
That's possibly. I mean, the design of some of the ships and things like that would definitely be different. I think that there would still be a lot of the cone style, like rocket ships and sort of Rococo rendering of things. But I think that Lucas would have done something to punch it up and bring it more into a modern presentation of it. Because here's the whole thing, like, if he had gotten that license, I mean, when was the last time someone had done something with it?
Right.
So would there have been probably more editorial interference, or producers and money people like mucking up the works? Probably, and that might have impaired uh, a good product. But
Yeah.
I mean, like, looking at it, like, I know it's real easy to draw these specious comparisons, but is Chewbacca all that different from Thun, the Lion Man? Like, I mean, like, Luke is kind of Flash Gordon. He's young and he's gawky and he's that teenager
I
incarnation
feel
of
like
it.
Luke and Han are like they split Flash in half.
Yes.
Two
Yeah,
characters.
absolutely they did. But again, Luke, sword fighting, great pilot, blaster and his other hand or whatever. Obviously Princess Leia could easily have been Princess Aura and been the Emperor's daughter instead of like some disconnected figure. She has that double bun hairdo that Queen Freya of Phrygia had.
Yeah.
So visually, I think that there are certain elements that, because of people's lack by the time of the 70s, some people's lack of familiarity with like the Flash Gordon property probably made it easier to slip some stuff like that by. And it's not that Star Wars is built on whether or not some chick has a hair bun, hairstyle or whatever,
right.
But there's a lot of stuff going on there. Emperor
I feel like
Palpatine and Ming, they're very
right.
similar.
I feel like you kind of saw a little bit of what could have been, I guess, in a way, with the Buck Rogers, because it was like they brought back Buck Rogers, but they gave it the aesthetic of Star Wars.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And Buck Rogers can easily be his whole own episode, and in fact probably should be. So that's a good note. We'll put a pin in that. But
Yeah, I'll have to read the book again to refresh my brain.
I like the book a lot. The comic strip it's fun. It's even more of an artifact and even more of a product of its time than Flash Gordon is.
The art doesn't hold up like Flash Gordon's art does.
Well, I mean, the art definitely doesn't hold up. And then on top of that, it's wildly, like, shockingly racist in a couple of spots. Like, I mean, I remember
and this
reading it.
This is like compared to a strip that has Ming the Merciless.
Right. Well, I know, and that's saying something. But it's just, I don't know what it is, man. But I definitely remember reading some of this stuff, and I was like, holy shit, this was like on, this is like this big in a newspaper, like in America, like in a
That's
certain
the
time.
one thing that, reading a lot of this old material, and I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent, but like just Cherry and the Pirates, Captain Easy, like, these guys were all brilliant cartoonists, but racism and bigotry were so baked into the waters that it was so like, I don't think these guys were really out there like trying to deliver hate speech. It's just it was such a prevalent point of view. It was just like people probably didn't even think about it or realize how hurtful, I mean, it's just kind of crazy to think, gosh, this was just,
look, man,
like effortless racism. It was like effortless racism in the sense that it was just so baked into the way of life,
Well, it's like, you got to remember, like, when Flash Gordon came out, it's January 1937. We're talking about, like, the Civil War was 70 years ago.
Right.
Am I doing the math? Yeah. Am I doing the math right? It was 70 years ago. And like, think about how much like society and technology and all these things had changed. But, to borrow a page from a whole other franchise, it's like Khan says in Star Trek, like, how little man himself has changed, and that's just a sad commentary on things in general, but whatever. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, man. It is. It's kind of shocking in a way, but it's not surprising to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of go in expecting it, like, all right, I'm about to see some shit that I'm not really
and then
enthusiastic about, but like I kind of want to know the roots of this genre and this material, but like you still find yourself getting shocked, even kind of prepping yourself mentally, you're still like kind of blown away.
I mean, the only thing that I can say is that I just really feel like, again, you talk about, well, this is talking about we're saying that Buck Rogers is so much worse than a comic with like Ming the Merciless and Flash Gordon. And it's like, honestly, it really was, man. I mean, it's like Flash actually comes off pretty well by the comparison, and that might also be another reason for its ultimate success. But Yeah, we did get a taste of what the genre, or not the genre, but the property might have looked like if Lucas had gotten hold of it, because they did give Buck Rogers the Star Wars treatment as far as the ships, the special effects,
Right.
and but the earlier novel like Armageddon 2145,
Yep.
I liked it. I remember reading it at one point and thinking like this is actually like a cool little concept, and um I don't know. They share
Well,
a
it kind
lot
of
of the
fits into
same.
that your one of your primary genres of interest, the post-apocalyptic genre. He goes
Yes,
into the future, and it's like
yes,
these gangs run everything. I watched the one thing in my backlog I did watch was the I think about the first half of the Buck Rogers serial, also starring Buster
right,
Crab, which
right,
is crazy to
yeah,
me. It'd be like if I play Spider-Man one year and the next year I play Superman or something. It's kind of like, gosh, can you really play? Because you're playing the original and like I guess not I wouldn't call them a knockoff, but like
right.
the distinguished competition.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny. It's a very Chris Evans like kind of scenario. Like I was the Human Torch, now I'm Captain America, and it's like
Right.
whatever, you can just roll
I
with it.
was Green Lantern, now I'm Deadpool.
Right, right, absolutely. And Buck Rogers is definitely his own thing. There's more of again, it's funny, but another one that doesn't use that. It's a little more metaphorical or metaphysical, but it's not astral projection. It's not dimensional or
It was
teleportational.
it was a gas.
Well, yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a Rip Van Winkle thing. Like, oh, I got knocked out and I woke up like 100 years in the future or whatever.
Yeah.
But in and of itself, that is a valid premise because it's the same thing as Steve Rogers Captain America. Like the hero is knocked out and wakes up as a man out of time, and it gives you this storytelling device where the writers can explain everything to the reader that they need to explain, because the hero is as much a stranger to the time as the reader is. And
Right.
that's a valid storytelling device that's still getting worn out, like right now. Right now there's somebody writing something using that like premise.
Right. Yeah.
But
It's funny you mentioned Chris Evans as he was Human Torch and then he was Captain America. Michael B. Jordan was the Human Torch and then
yep,
he became Killmonger. So it's like the Human Torch is the role you want if you want to
right,
springboard.
absolutely. And it's funny also, just going back to Evans, I mean, looks wise he'd have been an okay Flash.
Yeah,
he, he
he would have been a good choice for Flash. So
yeah,
would have Chris Hemsworth.
yeah, absolutely. Either one of them could have done a very decent Flash Gordon. And again, this goes back to talking about, well, what if Lucas had got the Flash Gordon franchise? That's the fun of like sitting here in armchair quarterbacking everything. We're talking about films that are never going to have been made, and
Right.
and in that way, it's always, nothing's going to ever approach like what your imagination, like the stank your imagination puts on it, is going to make it really cool.
I mean, for all we know, it would have gone into production hell and never been made.
Yeah, absolutely. And but there's something to it. Maybe King Features is missing out. Maybe they need to have their own like little shared universe thing, because everyone's trying to jump on it. Admittedly, like what Universal Studios like monster shared universe fell apart. Like
Defenders of the Earth,
right,
the movie.
right, absolutely. It's like, move over, Doctor Strange. Here's Mandrake the Magician.
I know.
You thought,
I mean, the Top Cat
yeah,
cape
yeah,
in the '80s was.
yes, I know, man.
Like,
Well, it's like you can forgive it if Zatanna wears it because she's got fishnets. She doesn't have any pants on.
right. Well, it's almost like it's like got an ironic quality to it, I guess, because she's. Whereas with Mandrake, it's just like the most unimaginative magician suit you can imagine.
People think
definitely. It's weird that they wouldn't give him a redesign. But I guess was his comic strip still running at the time?
I don't think so, but it's possible. Right. I mean, it's weird sometimes when you find out about these things. You're like, that's still running.
Well, it's kind of like, we were talking before this about Flash Gordon. Is the comic strip still being produced? And the answer was no. But then the Phantom and Prince Valiant are still being produced. So,
but are they actually being produced new ones, or are they just reprints?
Yes, new ones. Jeff Weigel,
really?
Actually, I follow him on Facebook. Fantastic, one of the best Phantom artists ever, in my opinion.
Really? Okay.
I'll have to tag you in one of his posts. Jeff Weigel. He's a beautiful artist. He actually does a lot of work for the Big Bang comics.
Okay. All right. I want to say I remember seeing some Phantom stuff posted on Facebook at one point, but
so I'll give them a plug here.
Yeah.
Not that they need us, because I don't know how many people will listen to this.
Plug them.
King Features has like was it called Comics World, I think it's called, where
Okay.
you have access to their back catalog of comic
Okay.
strips, Flash Gordon,
Right.
but also the Phantom, Popeye, a lot of other strips. I think it's like $2 or $3 a month,
I've
and
been
you get
reading the
access.
Popeye ones. The Popeye account on Facebook has been posting like strips
Yeah.
recently, and they've been like hysterical. They've been fun.
Well, you get access to the new ones, and you have access to their archive, so it's a really good deal. And if you're interested in comic strips and Flash Gordon, that's probably the cheapest way to do it. Because some of those Titan volumes I recommended earlier, I said were affordable. They're like $50 a piece, and I said they were affordable because the IDW editions with Jungle Jim included are like over
Right.
$100 a piece. So by comparison, and
Well,
then if you get the I was gonna say if you get the Amazon, because usually a book's $50 and you can go online, and if it's still in print, you can find it for like
right.
$30 or $25.
Well, I brought a few things out here, just reference material to look at, but the ones that I didn't bring out here, because like I have to have a special shelf up in my closet for them, is I have like 2 Italian reprint editions that have like these gorgeous, like they recolored everything, and it has like this amazing painterly quality, but it still has like amazing fidelity to the original strips, and they're gigantic. They're like what would be considered artist editions now, but I guess they came out in the 80s in Italy, or maybe it was the 90s. Who cares? But and and I took a chance when I saw them on eBay, and I got them on the cheap, and I bought them thinking like, even if, because they had Italian titles printed on the covers.
Right.
I was like, I don't know Italian, so maybe I'll just be looking at the art. But when I got them, they were in English on the inside.
Oh wow,
and
what a
oh
find!
man, and they're just like, they're incredible. They're
Yeah,
just.
I'd like to see some photos of these.
I
You got
will.
my
I
my
will.
interest peaked.
Yeah, I'll dig them out.
I
And I'll
might,
take
yeah,
some
I might
pictures
be
of them.
getting jealous here.
They're really nice, man. And
It is amazing how much like the European, how much more reverence they have for the classic material than the American audience. Like Richard Corbin, I just saw there's some new beautiful edition of Bloodstar that was
really.
published in France. It's gorgeous. Like Jose Villarrubia restored it and everything like that. I have the original. I was lucky and found like an original hardcover for like $20 on
Right.
Amazon like years and years ago. But it's like the guy can't even get, like they're not really reprinting a lot of his work in the US. There really isn't a huge market for it. Meanwhile, in France, he's huge. So
Whatever.
it's just a shame.
Richard Corbin died like 2 years ago, and people have like already forgotten about him. I mean, I know that's an oversimplification. I know his fans will like rise up in mass and be like, oh no, we haven't forgotten about him. But I'm just saying, like, and I love his work.
He was a tremendous. He really should be, like, in my personal opinion, he should be on the same level of regard as like someone like Robert Crumb, because he was really one of the early underground indie creators. I just think that the thing with indie is they value like autobiographical and humor comics a lot more than fantasy, and because Richard Corbin depicted fantasy more often, I don't think he's as fondly or as highly regarded as Robert Crumb.
I mean, just another thing to put a pin in, as long as we're going to be doing these deep dives into Sword and Planet. I mean, Den has his place. Den doesn't really use a sword. Every now and again, he uses
He's got a sword though hanging between his legs.
Yeah, I mean, he came packing his weapon. Absolutely. Right. But Den has his place in the Sword and Planet cosmology, and obviously we'll have to take, the opportunity to get to that, because it's such a great vision. It really is. I mean, like, it has a sensuality to it. It has like, it acknowledges how ridiculous it is with the goofiness of some of the humor, but just amazing, solid visuals, a lot of like wonderful panel to panel violence and action. Well,
I think you'd really appreciate the later volumes because it goes in a totally different direction. Have you read anything beyond the first Den?
I mean, I've probably read like the first 3 or 4 of them, but I don't.
Well, I mean, it's like how, like, in John Carter and Deja Thor's Live Happily Ever After, whereas like in the second one, they get divorced or something.
Yeah, and she wants him to start wearing clothes again, and he's like, "What are you talking about? I didn't come here to wear clothes." But
she wanted to go back to Earth.
Yeah, and she's got him henpecked, and he sort of like loses his mojo or his power per se. Not in a literal sense, which is what would happen in most comics these days, but it was subtle. It was a psychological thing, and it was good, man.
Yeah. Just you kind of took Sword and Planet different, but yeah, that's a pin for another day, just like Buck Rogers. So cool. I think we've covered what we can cover for now.
Absolutely. Well, as always, this is Greg and James. This is a podcast of Mars. I guess one of the commentators recently mentioned that it seemed like our last one got cut off, or the last few minutes were missing. It was just we decided to end on a lame joke. It was the end of the episode. So I guess this is our
Freeze
first official
frame.
sign off. Yeah, right. So this is our first official sign off. And if you're listening and you enjoy it, Dynamite, please keep coming back. If you've got a favorite Sword and Planet, or just any kind of pulp oriented thing, and you want us to talk about it, hit us up. And
yeah, it's not all going to be Sword and Planet. I mean, we're definitely getting to Robert E. Howard and Conan.
Yes, absolutely. And the Phantom, who came up earlier. We got to come back to the Jungle
Tarzan.
Adventure.
We're gonna have to do a Jungle Adventure episode.
So good things ahead. We'll talk to y'all later. Bye.
All right.